This incredible photograph shows Kay Francis, aged just 20, the day before her first ever trip to Paris in 1925. While in the City of Light, the young American would become a revelation, and from then on her life would turn into a thrilling rollercoaster of Hollywood fame, wild parties, and an astonishing collection of lovers ranging from her big-name co-stars to nobility and even to German spies. It was quite a ride for a girl born to a broken home in Oklahoma, and while the highs were among the highest, the lows were just as breathtaking, not least the tragedy of her ghost-like final years. Welcome to Hollywood Mysteries. Katharine Gibbs Francis's journey to fame is one that could have been put together by a writer for a 1920s movie magazine. She began life with one undeniable asset, truly unique beauty. Her story began with a familiar backdrop for early 20th century actresses, an absent alcoholic father and a mother who dreamed of a life on stage. Catherine Franks, Kay's mother, was a theater actress, though not a major star. Professionally, she went by her maiden name, Catherine Clinton. She became the second of at least 3 wives to Joseph Gibbs, a man more skilled at squandering his family's wealth and drinking than at finding success. Among his many children was a daughter named Catherine, named after her mother but with an A instead of the E. She was born on January 13, 1905, in a hotel in Oklahoma City, which was managed by her father. Gibbs was present long enough to see his daughter take her first steps, but didn't stick around much longer. Unlike many actresses who married, Catherine couldn't afford to leave her career behind. Acting was her only steady income before and after marrying Gibbs. Little Katie, as she was known, grew up watching her mother perform on stage. However, as a child, she showed no desire to follow in her mother's footsteps. Instead, she received her education at boarding schools rather than on the stage. Katie inherited her mother's dark features, but was tall and had a mysterious, easy charm, traits reminiscent of her father. As an adult, she would also reflect some of his darker character traits, including promiscuity and difficulty maintaining lasting relationships, along with a predisposition for heavy drinking. Unlike her father, though, she was careful with her finances, especially once she started earning what she referred to as serious money in films. This caution probably came from the financial hardships of her early life. The popular image of Kay Francis as a debutante who was born into high society is misleading. In fact, it is completely false. Catherine managed to save enough to pay for her daughter's education, which included time at a secretariat school, which was, coincidentally, named the Catherine Gibbs School of Secretarial Training. After graduating at 16, Kay did some modeling for ads in New York magazines, and more importantly, landed a job as an assistant to a social planner. This job introduced her to wealthy elites and eligible young men. Unfortunately, her first romantic interest mirrored her father, although unlike Joseph Gibbs, he came from a rich family. But he shared Gibbs's womanizing and drinking habits. His name was Dwight Francis, and they married in December 1922, just a month shy of her 18th birthday. The couple split their time between an apartment in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, near his family's home, and a Manhattan apartment on West 49th Street, in a neighborhood that was mostly residential at the time. While Kay enjoyed the peaceful life in Pittsfield, she preferred the excitement of the city. In New York, she frequently attended plays and concerts, occasionally working to help with living expenses. However, their marriage faltered after just over 2 years, mainly due to Dwight's wandering eye and Kay's growing disinterest in him. After meeting a new lover, she decided to separate from her husband. Her in-laws, who cared for Kay and blamed Dwight for their breakup, funded a vacation in Europe for them. The trip's primary aim was to secure a divorce in Paris, where, unlike in the US, no grounds or proof were needed in court. And so she sat for her passport photo and readied herself for this exciting trip, which, no doubt, provoked mixed feelings in the young pair. For Kay, this European trip turned into a transformative experience. In Paris, the 20-year-old, tall and dark, stood out among locals and fellow expatriates alike. She spent 6 months there, indulging in the nightlife at the chicest clubs, enjoying both alcohol and the free and easy romantic encounters so associated with the French capital. On her journey back, still riding a wave of excitement, but now low on funds, she decided she would do whatever she could to continue her life of excitement. She decided to pursue what she loved most, dressing in the latest Paris fashions and mingling with glamorous people. The only profession that allowed her to do both, and for which she had any qualifications, was acting. Upon her arrival in New York, she was determined to become an actress. Her looks and society connections helped her set up meetings with producers. While in Paris, she befriended fashion writers Lois Long and Charles Baskerville from The New Yorker, as well as Vogue editor Margaret Case, who, according to some accounts, encouraged her to pursue acting on the trip back home. Her familiarity with the stage, learned through her mother, helped her to find auditions. After some setbacks, she landed a minor role in an avant-garde Broadway production of Hamlet, produced by Al Woods. She managed to convince him of her experience with the play by claiming she had performed as Ophelia, though that had only happened in boarding school. Though Frances referred to it as a flop, Hamlet was actually a hit with critics, and her minor role as the player queen won some positive reviews. The production ran for 11 weeks, featuring 88 performances from its Broadway debut at the Booth Theater on November 9, 1925, until mid-January 1926. Shortly after Hamlet opened, Frances married for the second time, tying the knot with William Gaston, the son of a prominent Boston family. However, the couple never cohabited and divorced just a few months later. Their union was something of a shotgun wedding and ended just as fast. This marriage remained hidden from her film studios and the public until it came to light during her divorce from her third husband in 1933. Whether it was a desire to escape the city or not, Frances found herself working with the Stuart Walker Stock Company in early 1926. Walker was another connection she had made while in Europe the previous summer, and she took advantage of it. After touring the Midwest for much of the spring and summer, she returned to New York in the fall of 1926. She moved into an apartment at the Hotel Marlton in Greenwich Village to be near her latest flame, actor McKay Morris, who also had an apartment there. Morris proved to be a source of frustration for Kay. He was unwilling or unable to commit to a serious relationship, probably meaning he had no interest in becoming her third husband in almost as many years. He was also what polite society of the time would have termed impotent, a euphemism for homosexual. While he seemed to have some interest in Frances, he continued to pursue relationships with men, leaving her feeling somewhat heartbroken. During this time from 1927 to 1928, Kay built her reputation as a Broadway playgirl. She was linked to a wide range of prominent figures, including members of the Vanderbilt family, department stores heir Gimbel, and polo star Tommy Hitchcock. She also mingled with the famous stage actress Jean Eagles, and had an affair with the legendary aviator Charles Lindbergh. Furthermore, she found herself on the notorious casting couch of British actor Eddie Goulding, well known for his eccentric sexual preferences. Kay enthusiastically recounted her encounter with him in her diary and studiously listed the new techniques she uncovered during their meeting. However, this exciting period also had its darker aspects, as she underwent 2 abortions within a single year. Walter Huston, like many actors from Broadway, had caught the eye of film studios eager to transition to talking pictures. His debut project for Paramount Studios was an adaptation of the stage play Gentlemen of the Press. He was looking for a leading lady, and his eye was firmly set on Kay Frances. She always credited Huston with giving her the life-changing role of the vamp in the film, though she said that he had to convince her to take the part and sign her first film contract. She played Myra May, a fun-loving secretary who visits newspaper editor Wick Snell, portrayed by Huston, looking for help with a libel case. Gentlemen of the Press was filmed at Paramount's Astoria studio on Long Island. If Frances had needed to travel to Hollywood, she likely would have declined the opportunity. The studio was just a short commute from her Manhattan apartment on East 58th Street. She could film during the day and still have time to get ready for a night out in New York that evening. The movie premiered on May 4, 1929, at the Paramount Theater in Manhattan, and received mostly positive reviews. Though, as with any adaptation of a successful play, not everyone was impressed. It is a dialogue effusion in which the players appear frequently to be waiting for a signal before they speak their lines. These hushed interludes, brief though they may be, cause some discomfort, for it is quite evident that the characters are not thinking of what they are going to say, wrote Mordaunt Hall in the New York Times on May 13, 1929. Kay Frances would follow up with her second film alongside a group of seasoned stage performers, the Marx Brothers. She had already shown her comedic talent in her Broadway play Elmer the Great. In The Coconuts, a nearly direct film version of the Marx Brothers' hit Broadway musical, Frances took on a straight role. However, she had many individual scenes with Groucho, Chico, and Harpo, which required excellent comedic timing, something she clearly had. The final film shows that she enjoyed collaborating with the Marx Brothers. Kay recalled, "Chico pulled lingerie out of my hat. Harpo chased me all over the screen. Groucho wrestled with me. When they talk of me as the dignified Kay Frances, I think back to the pratfalls that I took with the Marx Brothers and have a nice, quiet giggle." At just 24, Frances had already lived a wild life as a party girl and socialite in both Paris and New York's nightlife world. She had endured the rigors of touring theater companies and Broadway, and had already been married and divorced twice. Few things seemed to unsettle her, except for perhaps the threat of poverty. But she was well on her way to leaving that behind. The studio, pleased with her performance, aimed to transfer her to Hollywood for a promotional campaign. They wanted to present her as the latest star from legitimate theater, making her mark in Tinseltown. Paramount had already crafted an image for her, a chic, sophisticated star ready to shine in Hollywood. But first, they had to persuade her to leave New York City. Initially, she resisted. "I said I wouldn't go. It was too far away," I told them, but I needed the money, and after 2 weeks of arguing, I finally gave in. A studio photographer greeted her at the train station to capture her arrival from the East. At the time, Constance Bennett and Lillian Tashman were considered the best-dressed actresses, and Paramount began a publicity push to position Kay as their rival. Kay Frances had officially arrived in Hollywood, her home for the next 2 decades. The following months would be a whirlwind of both professional and personal activities. First up, Kay met with producer P.P. Schulberg, toured the studio, and checked into the Roosevelt Hotel. She was quickly put to work, but also took time to learn something unusual for her: how to drive a car. It wasn't easy, as she humorously noted in her diary: 2 accidents, 1 nice man downtown, and a stone wall. Her first Hollywood project was Dangerous Curves, alongside Clara Bow, which began filming on April 18, 1929. According to legend, Clara suggested Kay shorten her name from Catherine to Kay for marketing purposes. While this may be true, earlier playbills from her time with the Stuart Walker Stock Company showed that she had experimented with shortening her name before. More importantly, Clara was kind enough to share tips on filmmaking. "It's wonderful how helpful Hollywood folks are," Kay said. "When I worked with Clara Bow, she was simply too grand. She said to me, 'Now, Kay, I'm the star, so naturally they train the camera on me. But if you'll cheat over just a little, you'll get in it just right too. You've got to keep that face in the camera, you know, darling.'" Much of Dangerous Curves was shot at night, meaning Kay sometimes worked until dawn. Despite her busy schedule, she still made time to socialize and began forming friendships in her new home. In those early months, she mingled with Hollywood elites and reconnected with an old friend, actress Kate Johnson, who had already moved to California. Though they were never physically involved, they shared a close bond and considered a romantic relationship at least once. Johnson had married director John Cromwell in 1928, and later became the mother of actor James Cromwell in 1940. Meanwhile, Kay's affair with Gentleman of the Press director Millard Webb had come to an end. Although they kept in touch through telegrams and phone calls, the distance proved too much for their fragile relationship. It was serious enough that he had once given her a ring. On May 13, 1929, they argued over the phone. Kay promptly took off Millard's ring and decided to look for a new partner. In May and June, Kay resisted advances from Walter Houston. She enjoyed spending time with him, but had no interest in a romantic relationship. One night, a drunken Walter ended up sleeping between her and Kathy. Eventually, he managed to get a kiss from Kay, but she felt no real attraction. The Marriage Playground was Kay's first film with Frederick March and her debut in a mother role, though her role was that of a glamorous actress lacking maternal instincts. The film received positive reviews, and Kay showcased her comedic talents better than ever before. She also appeared in Behind the Makeup, which wouldn't be released until early 1930. This film was important for her as it featured her first collaboration with William Powell, but she was again cast as the vamp. In July 1929, Kay moved into a rental house at 8401 Fountain Avenue in West Hollywood. She began writing about her new romantic partner, Kenneth McKenna, who would later become her third husband. Born Leo Mielziner Jr. in Canterbury, New Hampshire, in 1899, his parents were portrait artist Leo Mielziner and journalist Ella McKenna Friend Mielziner. While her love life attracted plenty of attention, her career did not seem to be generating the same level of excitement. Kay was still mainly cast in vamp-like roles and hadn't yet become a star, often overlooked in reviews. However, her salary had increased from $30 to $500 a week, and she was starting to be featured in plenty of pages in movie magazines. Perhaps most importantly and miraculously, Kay's past didn't seem to follow her to California. Few journalists were aware of her unconventional childhood or her scandalous life in New York. Unfortunately, she was on track to create new controversies, primarily due to her boozing. Kay noted many instances of excessive drinking in her diary, sometimes to the point of blacking out. Usually she felt regret and shame after these episodes, at least for as long as the hangovers lasted. In January 1930, Kay was loaned to United Artists for Raffles. Although her role was neither large nor particularly exciting, the film was popular due to Ronald Colman, and it helped Kay become more familiar to audiences. Rumors circulated that she and Colman might marry. Although Kay denied them, they did share a brief flirtation in February 1930, but she soon lost interest. Nonetheless, she valued the encouragement and acting advice he gave her, which helped shape her screen persona. Having been typecast as a villain in several films, Kay finally got to portray a different character in Paramount's Street of Chance in 1930. This time she played the wife of a gambler, again opposite William Powell. It marked her first sympathetic role and her first real lead. Kay credited producer David O. Selznick for believing in her. In turn, Selznick claimed responsibility for her success. Every single part of importance that Kay Francis played was due to my forcing her. Unfortunately, Kay suffered permanent damage to her eyes during the film's production. Director John Cromwell, who was new to filmmaking, didn't realize the dangers of the arc light. It took a day and a half for them to set up the equipment, and as the arc light came nearer and nearer for the close-up, I didn't want to break up the scene by complaining. It hurt my eyes, but we did the scene. It never had to be reshot. When it was over, tears came streaming down my face, and I had to spend 10 days in a dark room. Because of this incident, Kay wore medicated dark glasses for the rest of her life. Next, Paramount on Parade was a revue-style production designed to showcase the studio stars. Kay's role was intriguing because she played an exaggerated version of herself, giving audiences a glimpse of her true personality, tantrums and all. It also featured a Technicolor sequence with Kay, which was the first and last for her. Following that, in A Notorious Affair, Kay embraced the vamp role enthusiastically, managing to steal the spotlight from even the stunning Billy Dove. Kay, who likely rose to fame because of this sultry performance, decided that if they wanted her to portray a man-eater, she would fully commit. Critics took notice. The Russian countess with the emotional habits of Catherine the Great is given a smoking enactment by Kay Francis. She provides Hollywood's most disturbing portrayal since Hell's Angels. Kay's next film with William Powell, For the Defense, offered her a more complex role that combined elements of both vamp and sympathetic girlfriend. Reviews for Kay and the film were mixed, but her ability to wear fashionable outfits was noted. A critic wrote, Kay Francis again is asked to fill the role of a smart clothes horse, but she does so with dignity and a certain amount of feeling. Furthermore, she possesses one of the few musical feminine voices heard in pictures. When Let's Go Native came out, it became clear that Paramount was uncertain about how to utilize Kay's talents. The odd musical comedy featured the mismatched pairing of Jack Oakey and Jeanette MacDonald. It felt like a throwback to bad vaudeville, which made it a poor fit for Kay, who even had to sing. This would be a major challenge given her speech impediment and low, husky voice. Still, it was entertaining, even if for all the wrong reasons. Nonetheless, Paramount was pleased with Kay and renewed her contract in October 1930, which likely brought her some relief. Later that year, she starred in The Virtuous Sin, which was notable for several reasons. First, George Cukor co-directed it, and while the film wasn't perfect and later embarrassed him, it had its moments. Second, it was the only film where Kay appeared alongside Kenneth McKenna. In December 1930, Passion Flower was released, casting Kay as a man-trap who steals her cousin's husband, with the cousin played by her friend Kay Johnson. This melodrama was produced at MGM by Irving Thalberg and featured stunning gowns designed by Adrian. However, the film did not perform well at the box office or with critics. Co-star Charles Bickford described it as a dreadful piece of claptrap. Still, it was the first time Kay received top billing. Kay was quite superstitious. and often consulted astrologers and psychics, as she explained in many of her numerous magazine interviews at this time. Kay also owned a lucky pair of earrings. It's probably very, very silly and doesn't mean a thing, but why take the chance? I care little for jewelry, but during my first 2 pictures I happened to wear a certain pair of earrings, so ever since then I put them on for a scene or 2, she explained. What interested her fans the most was her perfect sartorial style. Standing at 5'9", she was the tallest of the major stars of her time, which allowed clothes to fit her slender frame beautifully. She was labeled a clothes horse by the press, but this was a title she resisted. Nevertheless, she was known for her impeccable fashion sense. Ori Kelly, the designer most closely associated with Kay, was an Australian who worked as a portrait painter and muralist. After dabbling in stage costuming, he met Cary Grant, then still known as Archie Leach, who recommended him to Warner Brothers. Ori Kelly was informed that he would be hired if both Kay Francis and Ruth Chatterton approved his designs. His sketches cleverly featured their likenesses, rather than the standard blank mannequins, and this won their enthusiastic approval. She and Ori Kelly carefully analyzed the costumes for each film. If I were playing a woman good and true, we used tailored, sophisticated clothes ordinarily reserved for the femme fatale. But when I played the heavy, I had them design my clothes with lots of frills, very fluffy and feminine and sweet, very girlish. I think it makes more sense to reverse it, to dress counter to the character, she explained. As the year came to a close, Kay Francis maintained her hectic lifestyle of socializing, filming, and life with Kenneth. The following year promised to be even busier, featuring a new studio and marriage. Kay's personal life revolved around Kenneth. Although she had brief flings with Ronald Colman and writer Arthur Hopkins, Kenneth remained her steady partner. Most of her diary entries from 1930 revolved around their sexual escapades, often using her trademark colorful language. Ken worked until 6 a.m. and then came and fucked me. God, I really do love him. So on January 17, 1931, they were married. On Kenneth's side, being in love with Kay wasn't easy. Kenneth hoped that marriage would help her settle down. While he had enjoyed something of a wild lifestyle himself during his days in New York theater, he genuinely wanted to spend his life with her. However, marriage did not curb Kay's promiscuity. Instead, it complicated things and caused emotional pain. As it turned out, Kenneth had convinced her to marry during a period of depression, and Kay soon regretted the decision, resenting him for it. The year 1931 turned out to be busy for Kay. Not only did she get married, but she also appeared in 7 films with top billing in several of them. In January 1931, it was announced that, quote, she of the sleek black hair and magnetic deep voice would co-star in Ruben Mamoulian's first Hollywood film, City Streets. Based on a story by Dashiell Hammett, the cast included Gary Cooper, Sylvia Sidney, and Paul Lucas. However, like many film announcements, this one changed, and sadly Kay was never directed by Mamoulian. Her role ultimately went to Winnie Gibson. Paramount then decided to keep her extremely busy until her eventual departure. Scandal Sheet, the first release of 1931, featured George Bancroft and gave Kay a solid role as a wandering wife. Directed by John Cromwell, her performance was well received. Miss Francis has what can be most nearly described as sensible seductiveness. Next came Ladies' Man, another film with William Powell. Although this film starred Carole Lombard, it turned out to be underwhelming. Critics noted not only the film's shortcomings, but also commented on Kay's unflattering hairstyle. Kay Francis's chief handicaps are an overly romantic, fireless part and a new coiffure. After that, Kay appeared in The Vice Squad alongside Paul Lucas. She warned her mother-in-law about the film. You were sweet about Ladies' Man, but please don't see Vice Squad. I am awful, the picture is awful, and the part is dreadful. Despite her concerns, neither the film nor her performance was terrible. One reporter accurately observed that she was seen much too briefly on the screen. RKO then borrowed Kay for Transgression, where she played a dual role as both vamp and wife. The film featured Nance O'Neill, a friend of the infamous axe murderer Lizzie Borden, a cousin of Olive Borden, an actress you can hear all about in our video on her life, which we have linked on screen now. MGM soon enlisted her for Guilty Hands, a mystery directed by Woody Van Dyke. This was yet another role as a seductress. I don't want to be a bad woman in too many pictures in succession, Kay said. Too much glamour, too much sin repeated often becomes monotonously dull. I'm speaking now about the screen, of course. A highlight of 1931 was 24 Hours, also starring Clive Brook and Miriam Hopkins. Girls About Town, another Paramount film directed by George Cukor, allowed Kay to work with her good friend, the vivacious Lillian Tashman, who had previously co-starred with her in The Marriage Playground. In this film, they wore lingerie and portrayed characters that could be described as high-priced call girls. All the fun of pre-code Hollywood was in full force here. One reviewer noted, Kay Francis shows off her figure in undies while explaining she's through with the gold digger racket and intends to go straight because she's found love with a rich rube. The undie pose and that bit about going straight all in one has its own satirical kick. Andy Lawler, who had become one of Kay's close friends, also appeared in the film as her unreliable husband. In October 1931, it was announced that Kay Francis would star alongside Frederick March in Paramount's The Master Key, which was later renamed Strangers in Love. Director Lothar Mendes was thrilled with the casting, and it was noted that Kay would receive her Warner Brothers salary of $2,000 a week, a significant increase from her $750 weekly pay at Paramount. Although Kay felt anxious about leaving Paramount due to the uncertainties of a new studio, she was relieved that there were no hard feelings following their early disagreements about the end of her contract. As 1932 began, Kay was firmly established as a star and would join Warner Brothers on January 11th. By the end of that year, she had appeared in some of the best films of her career. Ironically, while 1932 was one of the worst years for box office revenue in the industry, it became the greatest year for Kay. Her first film of 1932, The False Madonna, was an unexpectedly poignant story. In it, she portrayed a jaded conwoman, directed by Stuart Walker, who had previously mentored her on stage. Following that, Strangers in Love completed her contract with Paramount. The third film of 1932 was Man Wanted. Co-star David Manners was so handsome that he nearly overshadowed the film. Still, Warner Brothers effectively showcased Kay's charms too. Miss Francis, photographed well and as usual, wearing stunning costumes, creates a smooth, svelte portrayal as the wife who finds happiness in business rather than in high society. Next came the less memorable Street of Women, which featured Gloria Stewart's first film role. Stewart recalled Kay as a popular star and a beautifully dressed woman, and noted that the studio had to work around Kay's speech impediment. I remember an amusing story about Kay Francis on this film. She had a line that came out as, "I have to have my womb we-decorated." Needless to say, they rewrote the line. I'm sure it's not in the picture. Jewel Robbery, also made in 1932, became her best film to date. It was her first leading role in a comedy, once again pairing her with the charming William Powell, and they would quickly make another, One Way Passage, also released in 1932. She and William Powell shared excellent chemistry in this gem of a film. Production began in May 1932, using the SS Kalawal as a set. Because it is 5 miles by water taxi to their boat, they are living on the ship, anchored a mile beyond the breakwater at Long Beach. Altogether, there are 100 people living on the boat, including players, technicians, and cameramen, a report explained. While it sounded charming, the reality was quite different. Co-star Eileen McMahon described the working conditions. Warner's used a broken-down iron boat for location shooting and sent the cast offshore, giving us some miserable sum like 37 cents a day for food. It was boiling hot and the food was terrible. People got drunk and Tay Garnett made things difficult. The assistants did what little work there was, which wasn't much. Finally, the studio lost patience and brought us back to the lot to finish it. Through it all, Miss Francis behaved with great dignity and did her work without complaint. After making Jewel Robbery and One Way Passage, Kay could have chosen to step back, but her next film was even better. Kay and Kenneth planned to travel to Europe for their honeymoon, with their departure set for June 22nd. Just 5 hours before they were to leave, with trunks packed and farewells made, a leading role in an Ernst Lubitsch film came up, along with a massive salary of $26,000. Cynics assumed Kay chose the money over her vacation, but she insisted that her desire to work with Lubitsch was the reason for her decision. The money didn't matter. The money had absolutely nothing to do with it. I proved that because shortly before Lubitsch asked for me, I had an offer for another picture on the Paramount lot. The same sum of money was involved. I turned it down. But when it came to working for Lubitsch, when I weighed my honeymoon against the honor this meant, against the things I would learn under his direction, well, Lubitsch won. Trouble in Paradise is widely regarded as one of the finest films ever made, featuring one of Kay Francis's standout performances. With Herbert Marshall and Miriam Hopkins alongside her, It's puzzling why these three were never cast together again. The film benefited greatly from Ernst Lubitsch's direction, of course. Rumors suggested that Marshall, who was married, was juggling affairs with both Hopkins and Francis, which might even have improved their on-screen chemistry. However, Kay's diary makes no mention of an affair with Marshall, although she did socialize with him and his wife, Edna Best. In a letter to her mother-in-law, she wrote of her excitement. "I am working very steadily and so excitingly. Lubitsch is simply thrilling. I always knew he was a genius, but one can't really understand his particular greatness until under his direction. A divine script, a crew who worship the master. One is entranced by the really perfect unit. Much as I still regret our trip, this does compensate for me." The film was Kay's 28th project and represented the pinnacle of her career. Film writer Kurt Sodemak praised both her and the film. Tall, lovely, and sexy, I think Lubitsch brought out the best in her in Trouble in Paradise. It was and is a great film, and Kay Francis was great in it. Kay's last film of 1932, Sayonara, reunited her with Ronald Colman. While some people enjoy this film, Kay was left with the thankless role of the wronged wife, and audiences found it hard to accept Colman as an unfaithful husband. Despite her successes, Kay's drinking began to take a toll, leading her into situations that could harm her reputation. In September 1931, she attended a dinner party at Gloria Swanson's home, overindulged and behaved poorly, requiring an apology the following morning. She also recounted a party at Eddie Goulding's in her January 23, 1932 diary entry. "Swell time, but got very drunk. TB called me a lesbian. EH and I were very next to getting queer. Damn fool." TB likely referred to Tallulah Bankhead, and EH was probably Edith Head, who worked as an assistant to Travis Banton at Paramount. In March 1932, Kay returned home after 3 a.m. and had a heated argument with Kenneth, noting in her diary that he hit her. Just days earlier, Kenneth had been fired by Fox. From that moment, their marriage began to unravel. In 1933, right at the peak of her powers, Kay already began to see a decline in the quality of her film roles. Her first film of the year, The Keyhole, was her first collaboration with George Brent. Unfortunately, the chemistry between Brent and Francis fell short of the magic she had experienced with William Powell or Herbert Marshall. Next, Kay was borrowed by MGM for Storm at Daybreak, co-starring with Walter Houston. Although it must have been enjoyable to work with her former stage companion, the historical drama didn't impress critics, who felt Kay was miscast. Back at Warner Brothers, Kay found herself in Mary Stevens' MD, which many considered a turning point in her career, for the worse. This film was a melodramatic story with Kay portraying a professional woman. While the movie had its moments, it didn't play to her strengths at all. Around this time, she developed a new acting technique that involved staring blankly into the camera, reminiscent of the famous Garbo mask. This method proved effective, and she refined it for her films in 1934 and beyond. She was learning that less can be more in film acting. Kay was then paired with Edward G. Robinson in I Loved a Woman, a film that left both stars dissatisfied. Despite her pleas for Warner Brothers not to cast her, the studio insisted. During filming, Robinson earned a reputation for being difficult, particularly with writers. Producer Hal Wallace explained, "Kay was so tall we had to put Eddie on a box in some scenes to bring him level with her, and understandably he was humiliated. Irritable and self-conscious, he argued with Kay frequently." Now with things at home unbearable, Kay filed for divorce from Kenneth McKenna in Los Angeles, citing incompatibility and nagging. With the new year came Kay's newfound freedom as a single woman. By mid-January, she had a brief affair with Count Alfredo Campagna, but soon lost interest, especially after meeting Maurice Chevalier. Their affair began at the end of January 1934. "Had merciless afternoon with Maurice, 4 times in 2 hours," she wrote in her diary. However, by May, her old struggles reappeared. She noted in May that they experimented with heroin and soon expressed her boredom with the relationship. Maurice suggested ideas to spice up their romance, but Kay wasn't keen on his suggestion. "Swell evening, very exciting, discussing about lesbians in a threesome. Not practical, I'm afraid," she wrote. Meanwhile, in February, Kay outlined Kenneth's shortcomings during their divorce proceedings. He criticized her fashion choices, furniture placement, and even her acting. When her lawyer requested more examples, Kay didn't hold back. "I would come home late at night after working 12 to 14 hours, and he would keep me up for hours making sarcastic remarks. That made me nervous. On February 21st, 1934, she received an uncontested divorce in just 3 minutes. The details of Kay's divorce led reporters to dig into the identity of her mysterious second husband, revealing that he was William Gaston, who was still married to actress Rosamund Pinchot at the time. Amid all the personal drama, Kay continued to pursue her film career. In early 1934, she awaited news on Dubarry and a potential role as Josephine to Napoleon. She was also scheduled to appear with William Powell and Colin Clive in a film titled The Key, about the Irish Rebellion. Just before the production code took effect, Warner Brothers released Mandalay. This melodrama fully embraced its sordidness and provided plenty of campy fun. Kay portrayed a woman sold into white slavery by her unscrupulous boyfriend. One reviewer noted its appeal upon release. Make no mistake, you'll like Kay Francis and her clothes, her rich exotic lure, her drama. No matter how you quarrel with the overwrought story, the camera presents some lovely pictures of Miss Francis. Of course, the film censors were not pleased. In Wonderbar, Kay publicly voiced her dissatisfaction with the studio's treatment of her for the first time. Despite being promised a leading role, Dolores Del Rio's part was expanded at her expense. Frankly, I did not want to take part in that picture. I made no secret of my dissatisfaction with my role. It was a small, inconsequential part, and I believed, and still believe, that I should not have been forced by my contract to play it. While Kay valued professionalism, she bristled at claims that she had not given her best effort. Dr. Monica was another film that did little for Kay's career. This melodrama cast her as a professional woman who yearned to be a wife and mother. Although she described the part as the most interesting characterization she has had for a long time, she later admitted to on-set fights with director William Cayley. Kay wrote about her ambition to move away from sex roles, stating, "I want to get away from the new woman, the Dr. Monicas if I can. I want to do something essentially feminine." While filming British Agent, Kay had a brief encounter with co-star Leslie Howard. As with many of her fleeting romances, she quickly regretted it. The film was released in the fall of 1934, and casting Kay as Lennon's secretary raised a few eyebrows. Nonetheless, reviews for both the film and her performance were generally positive, with one critic noting, "Miss Francis's straight, breezy charm is well suited to the role of Elena." During production, Kay experienced a serious and somewhat mysterious injury. According to the Los Angeles Times, she was virtually rescued from the jaws of death, largely due to her own presence of mind. The report explained that on May 16th, Kay accidentally cut the artery in her right hand while breaking glass to enter her locked home. She had not wanted to wake her sleeping ill maid. If it weren't for the fact that Miss Francis quickly instructed the maid, whom she had to awaken, to apply a tourniquet to her arm, the bleeding would have been disastrous, the report explained. Kay's diary suggested that after the initial excitement of her relationship with Maurice, they became more like friends than lovers. Behind his charming exterior, he was often insecure and brooding. In many instances, Kay found herself more as his caretaker than a passionate partner. Although they relied on each other, once the passion faded in a relationship, Kay would typically move on and seek new romantic interests. In September 1933, The Goose and the Gander debuted, which was possibly Kay's best collaboration with George Brent. This film allowed her to flex her comedic abilities. Newsweek highlighted the change, stating, "In her new film, Warner's gives Miss Francis a chance to display her talents as a comedienne, instead of confining her to the role of a mannequin." However, critics once again pointed out her speech impediment, commenting, "Its chief impediment to an evening pleasantly unimportant in the cinema comes from its insistence on cramming the dialogue with R's, which has an embarrassing habit of becoming W's when Miss Francis goes to work on them." As rumors about Kay's relationship with screenwriter, director, and producer Delmer Daves spread, the gossip columns began tracking their every move. Frustrated by the attention, Kay and Del played a cat-and-mouse game with the press. One night in September 1935, they attended the premiere of Shipmates Forever. They hid in the balcony, staying for the next film after the audience cleared out. But eagle-eyed reporters were onto them, one writing, "Then Daves came down first and cautiously surveyed the situation. He finally gave Kay the high sign and the two faded away like the G-men were after them." A bizarre headline from March 25, 1936, showed the darker side of being a celebrity, and the object of adoration for sometimes slightly unhinged fans. It read, "Kay Francis home guarded by police. Girl hunted whose note warns of death plot." It turned out to be a case of mistaken identity. A 23-year-old named James Crawford had told a woman named Carol Lawrence that he had it in for Kay Francis because she and my wife had been arrested together. He clarified that he meant Kathleen Francis, an extra, not the famous actress. Kay Francis is my favorite star. I wouldn't make threats against her, Crawford insisted. Released in the summer of 1936, The White Angel found Kay again miscast, this time as Florence Nightingale. Being Florence Nightingale was not such a great departure for me. I've portrayed women doctors on the screen twice. I'm getting to be a hand at these old characterizations, she noted. Kay was then considered for the role of Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind. This somewhat improbable casting idea arose after she met with David Selznick on August 26, 1936. He handed her a copy of the book, and by August 29th, Kay had finished it and loved it. According to her diary, director George Cukor told her he saw her as Scarlett, but no one else on Earth, including Kay, could see it. This was not a happy period for Kay. She was frustrated with her career, and her relationship with Del Daves was strained. Baron Raven Eric Barnco entered her life as one of her most unlikely romances. It was also one of her more dangerous ones. They met on October 24, 1937, at a Beverly Hills party hosted by Countess di Frasso. When these two looked at each other over formal words of introduction, a movie magazine later gushed, a vague and inexplicable something passed between them. It must have been a harbinger of love, because love came so quickly and overwhelmingly soon after that. The romance between Kay Francis and Eric Barnico started off quietly, as Kay was still seeing Del Daves. Once Del left for Europe, she introduced Eric to her friends and they became sexually involved. According to Kay's diary, they first became intimate in late November, around the time she moved into her new home at 9033 Briarcrest Lane. She spent Christmas with him there, writing, "We baptized the library floor. Good fucking." By early 1938, Kay was falling for Eric, but feeling increasingly frustrated and down about her career. Although she had been announced as the star of The Sisters, the role ultimately went to Bette Davis. Kay asked Warner Brothers to consider her for the lead in Carlotta, but they turned her down, hoping she would request to be released from her contract. Determined, Kay continued to collect her paycheck while waiting for her contract to end. "There'll be no contract breaching on my part. I'm going to be a good girl and do everything I'm told, waiting all the time for the dawn of that great day, September 12th, she noted. Secrets of an Actress was poorly received, with one critic suggesting the studio was trying to sabotage her career. There is absolutely no excuse for releasing such a picture as this one proved to be. If Vitagraph wants to kill off Kay Francis, they are doing a swell job of it. This sentiment was not far from the truth, as Warner Brothers actively worked to make Kay's life difficult so she might walk out on her contract. She was one of the actresses, along with Greta Garbo, to have infamously been labeled as box office poison, and the studio were willing to go to any lengths to get rid of her. One former employee described it as one of the more sordid chapters in our history. When Kay rejected their settlement offers, the studio devised a plan. Since there was too much money at stake for us to allow her to graciously decline our final offer of a 50% settlement, the only other means at our disposal was to force her to quit. So began a campaign of harassment and humiliation, explained the source. The last film on Kay's contract, Women in the Wind, was lackluster and a disappointing end to her time at Warner Brothers. One critic summed it up well, stating, "This one rings no changes, follows the old pattern faithfully, generates no suspense and no excitement because it is always and completely predictable." In a final act of humiliation, Kay gave up her personal dressing room in the last week of filming and used the main dressing room instead. At 5:30 p.m. on September 28, 1938, Kay ended her relationship with the studio and became a free woman. Though she had been making movies for nearly a decade, it felt like a lifetime to her. By 1939, Kay's once promising career felt like a burden. Still, she had appeared in over 50 films, a few of which were outstanding, and she had become a millionaire. "I've done everything I set out to do, and now I'm going to enjoy myself. I've given 10 years of my life to accumulating enough money to do the things I want to do. 10 years of never being able to travel when I wanted to, never being able to entertain when I wanted to, or go out when I wanted to. Because picture schedules always had to be consulted before I could make plans. Now, I'm free." On February 22, 1939, RKO signed Kay for in name only at the encouragement of her friend Carol Lombard. Having gained at least 20 pounds during her struggles at Warner, Kay was so upset with her appearance during wardrobe tests that she quickly shed the weight. Trouble between Kay and Eric began to surface in March. Eric dislikes the publicity attached to my work as much as I do, understands it even less than I do, never having experienced anything of the sort. Eric had a valid reason for wanting to avoid press attention. Kay confided to friends that he would often vanish for days without explaining where he had gone or what he was doing. Her friends began to suspect he was taking advantage of her trust. They had never warmed to Eric, and strained friendships resulted as Kay defended him. As the world edged closer to war, more sinister suspicions about Eric began to emerge. In late March 1939, Eric claimed that Dorothy DeFrasso accused him of being a Nazi spy and announced his intention to file a slander lawsuit. Despite his distaste for publicity, he took his case to the newspapers. I am an American citizen, and I am a manufacturer of motors, and such false remarks as this may damage my business. Kay, who also detested such attention, was shocked. Dorothy DeFrasso was equally confused. Someone must be mad. I never said anything of the sort. I haven't seen the Baron Barnico in weeks. I didn't know the Baron in Europe or Germany. I do not know what his politics are, and I must say I couldn't care less. The truth is, Erich Barnico likely was a German spy, albeit a reluctant one. He met senior Luftwaffe officer and World War I hero Ernst Udet in New York in 1933 and discussed the possibility of joining the Nazi Party, but neither seemed enthusiastic about the Nazis or Hitler. The FBI took an interest in Eric after receiving tips about his alleged fascination with poisonous gases. When war broke out in Europe, Eric abruptly left everything behind and returned to Germany, leaving Kay shocked and heartbroken. Amidst Red Cross classes, distress about Eric, and a relentless social calendar, Kay began an affair with director Ruben Mamoulian. She expressed her relief at his sexual prowess in her diary, complimenting as one of her finest lovers. During the same month, she briefly dated Eddie Mayer, but that relationship faltered because she found him unattractive, though she did feel some pity for him. Despite her new romances, Kay still yearned for Eric, often rereading his letters. She hosted a party for producer Charles K. Feldman, and after drinks at Ciro's, they returned to her home. Slept with him and he may be the best of them all. Christ, I am a slut, she wrote. Throughout May, Kay balanced relationships with Charles, Ruben, Eddie, and even Harry Crocker. Crocker was a silent film actor who had worked with Charlie Chaplin. Then came the shocking news that Eric had been seriously injured. This upset her greatly, though it turned out to be nothing more than a rumor. However, the reality was even more tragic. Loyal to his fellow World War I pilots, Eric rejoined the German military. He secured a high-ranking position but refused to serve under the notorious Erhard Milch after his superior was killed. As America entered the war on December 8, 1941, Eric lost hope of reuniting with Kay. Just days later, he went hunting and tragically shot himself on his family's property in Altmaren, Pomerania. His death remained a secret for decades, and it's unlikely Kay ever learned what happened to him. She continued to mark the date of their meeting in her diary for years after that. As a freelancer, Kay's workload decreased, but the roles available were not much better than those at Warner Brothers. Her final film in 1940, Little Men, was an RKO production that never reached the heights of any adaptation of Little Women. To make matters worse, Kay was asked to meet one of the stars at the Los Angeles train station. But this was no ordinary movie star. Unlike most of her social circle, the star had 4 legs and went moo. The owners of Elsie the Cow requested her presence for a parade and a brass band in exchange for the cow's free use. In July 1940, Kay began a new romance with director Fritz Lang. Like many of her relationships, this one was intense but brief. By the end of the month, they were inseparable, attending premieres, horse races, parties, romantic dinners, and dances. By September, rumors circulated that a wedding might be on the horizon. However, by late fall, their affair largely fizzled out, although they remained on friendly terms. Kay's next serious relationship was with Ivan Goff, a handsome Australian. Goff started as a newspaperman in Australia before moving to America in the early 1930s. By 1936, he was the Hollywood correspondent for the London Daily Mirror. Kay met him in July when Mamoulian took her to a party at producer Henry Blank's home. Their romance became serious by September. though Kay took a trip to Honolulu with Ruben in November, where they stayed at the Royal Hawaiian Hotel. She felt guilty about being unfaithful to Ivan during this trip. After returning, Ivan became her steady companion for the rest of 1940. It was also rumored that Marlene Dietrich also had an affair with Kay in 1940, though no solid evidence of this has surfaced. This rumor may have arisen from Dietrich's lengthy FBI file, which included mentions of Kay. There were also speculations about Kay's sexual involvement with Lillian Tashman, Tallulah Bankhead, and Mary Martin, but none of these relationships were documented in Kay's diary. Kay's rumored romantic liaisons were also suggested to have contributed to her dismissal from Warner Brothers. Betty Davis recounted one of the more salacious rumors involving Kay. According to Davis, Kay left Warner Brothers after being discovered in a compromising situation with another unknown woman. Beyond her film work during the war, Kay was an enthusiastic volunteer with the USO, just like many stars of the era. Alongside Myrna Loy, Kay connected with soldiers and sailors. According to Loy, Kay was a little ahead of her time, using four-letter words that shocked me terribly, but I liked her. We shared a reality beyond titles and organizations at Long Beach, handing out coffee and donuts and whatever reassurance we could to draftees bound for Hawaii. We saw untrained kids inducted, all so young and bewildered. An endless stream totally unprepared for war. It broke our hearts. The post-war years were particularly challenging for Kay. She left movies and returned to the stage, but she suffered the loss of a close friend in a tragic accident and almost died herself. On January 26, 1947, her dear friend Grace Moore died in a plane crash. Moore had known Kay since her early Hollywood days in 1930 and was one of her closest confidants. In January 1948, Kay found herself in a string of one-night stands and a seemingly endless series of performances in small towns in Illinois and Indiana, followed by a week at the Schubert Theater in Detroit. Soon after, she was rushed to the hospital in critical condition, and her boyfriend of the moment, producer Howard Hap Graham, was taken into custody for questioning regarding attempted murder. Graham had called the police to Kay's hotel room. Upon arrival, they found her semi-conscious, with suspicious bruises and second-degree burns. Reports suggested the presence of half-empty bottles of Scotch whiskey, and the papers latched on to the idea of a wild party. The specter of a dark-haired Hollywood actress passing away, surrounded by mystery and broken bottles, had lingered on all these years after the tragic end of Virginia Rapé, another fascinating figure you can hear all about in our video on her life, linked on screen now. However, there would be no sex drama in Kay's case. The account Graham provided to the police, which Kay later supported, seemed confusing at first, but became clearer with the context of a large amount of alcohol being involved. Kay had been suffering from a lingering cold when she opened State of the Union on January 18th at the Hartman Theater in Columbus. After leaving her hotel with wet hair covered by a turban for a radio interview, her cold worsened. Audience members noted her poor condition during the performance on January 22nd. Graham told police he had left Kay's room at the Deschler Wellick Hotel around 2:30 a.m. on January 23rd. She called him about 6:30 a.m. complaining of illness and claiming she had overdosed on sleeping pills. When he returned to her room, he called Dr. Maurice Roussoff, who advised fresh air. Graham opened a window and propped Kay up, causing her to lean against a hot air register, resulting in severe burns to her legs. He accidentally spilled hot coffee on her neck as well. When Kay fainted, he called for help, and police took him in for questioning at the hospital, holding him for 5 hours. When Kay regained consciousness, she confirmed Graham's account and explained that she had been ill for 2 weeks. She noted that the tour had been tough and admitted to mistakenly taking too many sleeping pills. During her stay in the hospital, they pumped her stomach and placed her in an oxygen tent. Her legs were burned from her knees to her hips. Embarrassed by the situation, Kay insisted on leaving the hospital, eager to escape the press that was eagerly reporting on the scandal. By March, Kay was recovering but struggled with feelings of depression. By mid-month, she was finally able to walk again, albeit stiffly. To regain control over her career and life, Kay made a decision to focus on summer theater along the Atlantic coast. While she considered following the trend of Hollywood stars moving to television, she was wary of the new medium. Kay didn't hesitate to share her main reason for avoiding television. Women look too darn old on it. Observant as ever, she added, I have the utmost admiration for it, but from the standpoint of an actress, it's bad. Kay's first step to overcome her television apprehension came in the fall of 1949. Her debut was set for September 19th on the Chevrolet Teletheater in a teleplay titled Leo and Sagittarius, written by Jack Bentcover. Although Kay was a Capricorn, the plot seemed fitting. She would portray a fashion designer in love. When Kay Francis turned 50 on January 13, 1955, she had spent nearly 3 decades acting across various platforms: stage, film, radio, and television. In the following years, Kay split her time between her apartment on 64th Street in Manhattan and summer rentals in Cape Cod. A woman can feel old, very desolate, very neglected, very unwanted, even at 20, if she has no one to love her, she once remarked. And it was then all the more tragic that she would experience this desolation during the last 7 years of her life, as she became increasingly reclusive. While she maintained contact with a few old friends, her social life dwindled, much like another famous recluse, Greta Garbo. Unfortunately, Kay had already lost many friendships, largely due to her drinking. After an embarrassing incident at an East Side restaurant, where she fell trying to leave, Charles Baskerville and other guests chose not to accept any further dinner invitations from her. Beatrice Stewart sadly recounted a day when she found Kay intoxicated and in tears in Bergdorf's fur department. Bea managed to get Kay into a dressing room to calm her down. Eventually, Kay purchased a mink stole before heading home to sober up. But this was far from an isolated incident and was indicative of her state of mind in her later years. In 1966, director Ross Hunter offered Kay her last film role as Estelle Anderson, Lana Turner's villainous mother-in-law in Madam X. Kay declined the role, which Myrna Loy also turned down before Constance Bennett accepted it. She was never offered another role. Her declining health soon became a concern, a consequence of years of alcohol and tobacco use. She underwent surgeries to remove a kidney and part of a lung, had to wear a back brace, and even broke an ankle. Eventually, she was diagnosed with cancer and had a mastectomy. After this, she retreated permanently to her apartment. In her final days, Kay spent her time in bed, reading, watching television, drinking, and taking medication. She would awake in the middle of the night in a state of clarity, frightened and lonely, and call friends in tears. By this point, she had a hospital-style bed set up in her apartment and employed a housekeeper nurse to assist her. She passed away on August 26, 1968, at the age of 63, with no immediate family. She left the entirety of her enormous fortune to a charity which trains seeing eye dogs for the blind. The last year of Kay's life must have been awful. Not only was she terminally ill, but the world around her seemed to be in turmoil. New York was in upheaval, America was at war in Vietnam, and the social order was being overthrown. Kay had outlived the glamorous era she once embodied. Many preferred to remember her in a different light, her glamorous form in Trouble in Paradise perhaps, or simply reclining on a chaise longue, dressed in an exquisite Ori Kelly gown, sipping a Paradise cocktail, and smiling the dazzling Kay Francis smile. That's about all for this episode. If you made it this far, please consider subscribing, as it gives us a boost with YouTube and helps us to bring you more videos. If you want more stories about Hollywood, why not become a Patreon supporter or YouTube member? For $3 a month, you can receive our weekly Hollywood Histories essays with many other perks available. Until next week, sweet dreams.